In today's training, I'm going to be talking about appraisals and the appraisal process. So what is an appraisal? Basically, an appraisal is an opinion or a determination of value supported by factual evidence. In the case of a financed real estate transaction, the appraisal is essentially a validation of the purchase price or the contract price of the property for the lender. The lender is not going to loan on a property unless they confirm the value, and they're going to base their loan to value requirements on the appraised value. So contract price is one thing, but the appraised value kind of becomes gospel for the lender. That's what they're going to use for all of their loan to value calculations and things like that. So the appraisal is a check or a validation of the value of any property being financed in a real estate transaction. In a residential transaction, it usually happens 1 to 2 weeks after you go under contract. Many lenders will wait until inspections are done. They'll wait for you as the buyer's agent to tell them, okay, inspections are done, we're moving forward, you can go ahead and order the appraisal. But this is a conversation you need to have with your buyer because some buyers want the appraisal done right away. They don't want to wait. They would love to have the appraisal back during that first 5, 10, 15 day inspection contingency period, so they can validate the value and use that as one more factor to determine whether or not they want to move forward with the deal. In other cases, you may be trying to facilitate a really quick closing. You may already know that the buyer is going to move forward with this deal, whether the appraisal comes back to support the purchase price or not. They're willing to just pitch in more money, a higher down payment. So the appraisal is more of a formality in that scenario. If you're trying to hit a 20 or 30 day closing, you might need to order the appraisal right away. As the buyer's agent, this is your job to communicate with the lender and let them know when your buyer would like that appraisal to be ordered. One reason they wait sometimes for inspections is the appraisal costs about $500 or $600. So that's $500 or $600 of your buyer's hard-earned money that gets spent, sometimes only to back out during inspections. And so it can go either way. Both ways make sense. It depends on the situation, but don't just assume that your buyer wants to wait until after inspections. It's an easy question to ask and confirm with the buyer, then confirm with the lender how and when you want to tackle the ordering of the appraisal. Now, as the buyer's agent, it is crucial for you to understand the appraisal process, but as much as you and your buyer may want the property to appraise for the contract price, is it really in your buyer's best interest to try to help support the appraised value? It's kind of a touchy area if you think about it, because your job as the buyer's agent is to get them the property for the lowest price possible. That's what's in their best interest. So for that reason, it's customary for the listing agent to typically deal with the appraiser and deal with the appraisal process or the on-site inspection by the appraiser during the contract period. And so more often than not, the appraiser will contact the listing agent to schedule access to the property and coordinate just the appraisal process. Now, if you're the listing agent, it usually comes up, or at least it comes up in most people's thought processes. Do I need to meet the appraiser there? Should I leave them a bottle of whiskey or a box of chocolates? Most appraisers, if you ask, they don't really want you there to babysit them. They would prefer to show up and have access to the property and do their thing without you looking over their shoulder. But most appraisers are also very appreciative of any information and data points you can provide them about the property. So what I've found is kind of a reasonable middle of the road approach is to leave a folder on site in an obvious location so the appraiser can't miss it. In that folder, include information about the property, such as the process and the comps that you used when you set the pricing as the listing agent. If you start off in the listing period, or when you list a property, if you're thinking like an appraiser, you should already be looking at very comparable properties within a certain range of location of where the property is. So if you started off thinking like an appraiser, you should be able to convey to the actual appraiser, well, here's why I priced the property the way that we did. Here are some of the comparable sales that we used. Here are some of the things that are similar or things that are different between the subject property and these comparable sales that we used. The other thing that the appraiser is happy to have from you is the market reaction to your listing. Did you receive 6 offers above list price? The only way the appraiser would know that is if you tell them. And so let the appraiser know, hey, we actually had 3 offers at or above our asking price. We accepted this one because of the terms or the financing or the closing or whatever the case may be. But give the appraiser, especially if it's a positive indication, give the appraiser some indication of how the market reacted to your listing, especially if you had multiple offers. Show those to the appraiser. Here you go. We had 5 offers on this property. All of them were above the asking price. That's a strong indication of the market forces that are driving, the prices, of the property. And so that's a useful sort of indicator for the appraisal. It doesn't mean it's going to appraise at that price, but it's another data point. It's something else for the appraiser to use that he or she wouldn't have known about if you didn't tell them. And then lastly, specific details about the property. The appraiser doesn't know how much you spent on this, the seller spent on this kitchen renovation, or how old the roof is, or what was done as part of the most recent renovations. And so tell them, give them a laundry list of everything, all the repairs and upgrades that were done to the property, when those repairs and upgrades were done, and approximately how much was spent on them. It doesn't have to be really detailed, but you can say, well, in 2015 they replaced the roof, in 2018 they replaced the AC unit, and just give them kind of a laundry list of the age of major systems, and also any major renovations or upgrades like kitchen and bathroom updates, flooring, and things like that. So I just mentioned how it's important for the listing agent to try and provide the appraiser with information and data that supports the purchase price of the property. And I mentioned that the buyer and the buyer's agent usually want the property to appraise because they've got it under contract, they're excited about it, they want to buy it. But it does happen sometimes, folks. You get that dreaded notification that the appraisal does not support the purchase price. And then you have to go into action. Whether you're the buyer's agent or the listing agent, there are some steps you need to take to deal with what we call a short appraisal. So after a short appraisal, one of 5 things can happen. The listing agent and the seller can dispute the appraisal. They can say, hey, you missed a couple of recent sales here, you missed some comparables, you missed some features about the property, the appraisal is just wrong, and here's some very specific data and very specific reasons we think that it's wrong. You can dispute that through the lender. They'll go back to the appraiser and ask them to take a look at what you provided. Sometimes it works. I'd say about 80% of the time it doesn't. So the other things that can happen are, obviously, the seller can lower the purchase price to match the appraisal. The buyer can bring more money to closing, make a higher down payment. The contract price doesn't change, but the loan to value requirements from the lender are based on that appraised value. And so another option is for the buyer to simply make up the difference. In some cases, the buyer might be able to cancel the deal and say, hey, it didn't appraise, I'm not paying any more, I don't have any more cash to bring to closing, so I'm out. Obviously, that's going to be very dependent on your financing contingency and or your appraisal contingency that are written into your contract. And so you need to make sure you understand those contingencies. And then finally, what often does end up happening is they meet in the middle. Maybe the seller comes down $2,000 and maybe the buyer brings an extra $2,000 to closing to make up a $4,000 shortage on the appraisal. It becomes a negotiation between the buyer and seller, conducted between the listing agent and the buyer's agent. And so that's why it's so crucial for you to understand the appraisal process, the appraisal dispute process, and everything that's involved with it. So I'm a firm believer that you need to think like an appraiser when you're pricing a property as a listing agent, or when you're valuing a property and making offers as the buyer's agent. So below, I've included an agent's guide to the appraisal process. This is a great 50-page PDF manual written by Chris Dolland out of Austin, Texas. He's an experienced real estate appraiser, and he's done a lot of work in appraisal disputes. And it's an excellent overview of the appraisal. and the appraisal dispute process. I highly encourage you to become really familiar with this appraisal guide that I'm attaching here. And then finally, I highly recommend that you look at some actual appraisals. Understand the document that the appraisers use and understand the thought processes and the actions that go into preparing an appraisal. So as a new agent, I realize you may not have a bunch of appraisals laying around your home office, so I'm also attaching several appraisals below for you to look at and review and study. And I think between the guide and between the sample appraisals and between our discussion here, I think you'll be much, much better prepared to manage the appraisal process, whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent. Thanks.